having arrived. The House State Affairs Committee will be in order. Our secretary will take a silent roll, and we do have some minutes to be approved, committee. Representative Allgood.
Madam Chair, I have reviewed the minutes from Tuesday, February 7th, 2023, and move for their approval.
Committee, we have a motion to approve the minutes from February 7th. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Say nay. All right, the motion has passed. The minutes are approved. And the first item of business on the agenda is RS 30197, Representative Manwaring.
Good morning, Madam Chair. It's great to be in State Affairs this morning. Dustin Manwaring, State Representative, District 29 from Pocatello. This proposed legislation is to consolidate the March presidential primary election with the May primary election date. Currently, presidential primary elections are held on the second Tuesday in March in each presidential election year. This would put the presidential primary with all other primary elections held on the third Tuesday in May. Moving up the presidential primary dates started with both parties holding presidential caucuses in 2012. And then in 2016, the Republican Party switched to a primary system, and the Democrat Party kept their caucus system for their presidential primary in 2016. And then in 2020, both parties have done primaries and moved away from the caucus system. The intent seemed to be to attract national attention and to attract more visits from presidential primary candidates to Idaho. Well, this hasn't worked very well. With hardly any presidential candidates visiting or giving Idaho extra attention. And it's also come at a significant cost to our state. If you look at the last two presidential primary elections in 2016 and 2020, they've cost Idaho approximately $2 million each. If we look forward to 2024, if we hold a presidential primary election in March again, with inflation and increased costs of elections, that's estimated to cost $2.5 million, plus a couple $100,000 to do the election audit. So that's a $2.7 million price tag for something that isn't working very well. Madam Chair and committee, I'll stand for any questions, but I'd ask you to introduce this RS so we can continue to talk about why this makes sense for Idaho and is also something that's fiscally responsible for us to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Manwaring. Representative Andrus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we introduce RS 30197.
Committee, you heard the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the RS is introduced. Thank you, Representative Manwaring.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Next on our agenda is RS 29922C1, Representative Allgood. Please state your name and who you represent.
Chris Allgood, I represent District 11, Caldwell. And Madam Chair, the document I have is C2. Do you have that in front of you?
Representative Allgood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Representative Allgood, we'll go at ease for just a minute and figure that out. Committee will be in order, and Representative Allgood, since we have apparently the wrong RS on the agenda, the best thing that we can do is schedule it for tomorrow.
That would be fine, thank you.
Oh, all right, thank you, Representative. All right, committee, the next item on the agenda is RS 30168, Representative Alfieri.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Representatives. My name is Joe Alfieri from District 4, Coeur d'Alene, and RS 30168 is a repeal of affidavit voting. It affects Section 341114, and the operative phrase is on the third page, lines 10 and 11. Affidavit voting, the way it works is someone who gets to the poll and says that they don't have their voter ID with them, their information with them, any information at all, they can just sign an affidavit attesting that they are who they claim to be, and that the elections office is to follow up on that at some point in the near future and make sure that that person actually is who they claim to be. But the vote goes in. It's very rarely used, frankly, and I will tell you that this is in cooperation with the Secretary of State's office, who recommended that we pass this legislation. It presents some difficulty in verifying ID, and there's, of course, an additional cost to the elections office because it requires them to go ahead and check the identity of that person, so we've got some time delay there. I think it's something that we need to eliminate, so I would ask that you would move this legislation forward and introduce it.
Thank you, Representative
I'll stand for any
Alfieri.
questions.
Representative Palmer.
I would move to introduce RS 30168.
And Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Representative Alfieri, I just had a question. So I believe the Secretary of State testified that, or has said that there were about 1,500 of these personal identification ballots that were used in the last election. What remedy or replacement idea do you have for the 1,500 voters who, or 1,500 like voters, similar voters in the future who aren't able to vote? Is there anything in this bill that would give them some kind of alternative if they show up at the polls and they've lost their driver's license, or maybe the driver's license is expired and the poll watchers won't take it? I just wonder if there's any other alternative for them in this bill.
Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Gannon. Actually, the alternative is to produce a valid ID of some sort. I mean, we require identification for virtually everything that we do, to get on an airplane, to buy pharmaceutical items. I don't see any reason why we should make an exception for voting.
Follow up?
No, Madam Chair, just a comment that I think it would be better to have a bill introduced that provided some kind of alternative way for someone to vote if they show up at the polls and for some reason their driver's license isn't in their wallet or their handbag or whatever. And I think there are ways that you could verify a person if, for example, by maybe a phone call to the elections office to verify that and voted, that the person lived at a particular address, that kind of thing. I think also the affidavit, which I did pass out to the committee, requires a statement under perjury, penalty of perjury, that you are the person. So there is that a very serious remedy for anybody who signs an affidavit, a false affidavit. So I would hope we'd explore maybe an alternative remedy to just abolishing a way that makes it more convenient for voters and which also provides a remedy when somebody forgets their wallet, their driver's license, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Representative Skog.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Alfieri, if I show up to vote and my driver's license or ID is expired by a week, am I prevented from voting under this law?
Representative Alfieri.
Madam Chair, Representative Skog, I actually don't know the detail of that. We'll have to find out for you and be happy to address that in the hearing.
All right. Committee, we have a motion to introduce RS 30168. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, the motion passes and RS 30168 will be introduced. The next item on the agenda is RS 30230. Representative Crane 12.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Representative Jaron Crane, District 12 in Nampa. So what we have before us today is RS 30230. This piece of legislation seeks to protect minors against obscene or harmful material in public libraries. And seeing how these public school and community libraries are funded by Idaho taxpayer dollars, it is in the best interest of our state that these institutions make a reasonable effort to restrict access to children when it comes to these materials in libraries. So with that, Madam Chair, you have the RS before you, and I would ask that you introduce it and stand for any questions.
Representative Crane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we dealt with this issue last year. The committee's very familiar with it, so I'd move to introduce RS 30230.
All right, committee, we have a motion to introduce. Are there further questions for the sponsor? Is there any further discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor of introducing RS 30230, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. All right, the motion passes, and RS 30230 will be introduced. Last on the agenda today, we have House Joint Memorial 1 with Representatives Ehart and Boyle. Ladies?
Thank you, good Chairwoman and Committee. I am Representative Barbara Ehart from District 33, and we are most happy to be here today. I figured part of what I'll do, I won't spend a lot of time up here, but I thought I'd kind of go through the process that has gotten us here. This process began in December of 2020 when we had all of us had received an invite to a Zoom conference with this organization called Greater Idaho, or Citizens for the Greater Idaho Movement. And I was intrigued. I was intrigued from the beginning, and I jumped on that first call. And right away, I'll tell you what, it resonated with me. There's another one shortly after that, and a few more people jumped on. Actually, I think in this room, the only other person that was on that call was Representative Scott, and had jumped on that call also. I was so intrigued with this that I reached out to President of the movement, Mike McCarty. He's not here today. He was unable to make it. But I reached out to him to have a conversation and, share more with me about this movement. And the more I learned about the movement, the more impressed I was I'm just going to say in the depths of my heart that this was something really important. And it made sense. We are talking about a portion of Oregon. And at that time, if anybody's interested, there was a portion of Oregon, Washington, and California, but really we were only dealing with Oregon, that felt like they no longer fit in the state in which they resided. And they no longer fit in that state. I'll just say this, so often I hear that thrown around in our vernacular today, this word democracy. And the word democracy, well, the problem is we're not a democracy. We're a republic, and a republic is designed to protect the minority. Unfortunately, I believe that democracy was at work in Oregon, and they no longer felt protected. Their rights were no longer protected. And so they were reaching out to seek redress from someone else, and that happened to be us. Now, as I was first hearing about this, I asked myself, why wouldn't we at least want to have this conversation? Why, with Idaho having been the fastest growing state in the union until recently, where I believe Florida passed us, why wouldn't we want to have a conversation with so many people moving in here about expanding our landmass? Why wouldn't we want to have that conversation? And why wouldn't we want to have a conversation that involved increasing our water and some of the resources, agriculture, timber, minerals? Why wouldn't we at least want to have that conversation? And lastly, why wouldn't we want to have a conversation that involved bringing in people that are very much like-minded like us as Idahoans? And I really felt that this was something that made sense. And so as we continued, more people have gotten involved, and more people in here, I believe you can see that it has started to resonate with. Why wouldn't we want to have that conversation? As I've been involved with this, I've had the opportunity to meet with media throughout the United States, from the New York Times to the LA Times and everyone in between. And one of the questions that they'll bring up is, okay, this is great, but you don't really think it's going to happen, do you? And I want to answer that. You know, this is not a common practice. It is probably a little bit of an uphill, I won't even say battle, but an uphill effort. But the effort makes sense. And people all over the United States are watching us. They actually are. This movement actually has a lot of traction because of the good work that you're going to hear from the Oregon people that they've been able to do. And so my response to them is, you know, I actually think it could happen because there are basically only three ways when people within a state, when they feel disenfranchised, three things that they can do. They can either form another state, and we know that's not going to happen. They can succeed from the union, and we know what that brought on 150 some odd years ago. Or they can do what they're doing now and basically say, we'd like to move the borders because the borders have been moved before. It has happened. And so as I tell people that, I say, you know what? I believe that it is possible. And let's have that conversation. A couple things before I end that I think is very important to note, that in doing this, there's some false notion out there that somehow Oregon would come with Oregon's laws. Oregon won't come with any Oregon laws. It would be all Idaho laws, every last one of them. The beauty of that, and you're going to hear more of this, is, you know, we have a little bit of a drug problem right on the side of our border. A lot of Idahoans are going there and getting drugs. That will be pushed hundreds of miles away. We don't want the drugs, and the people you're going to hear from, they voted against the drugs. They don't want them either. We also have, I think, given what the stance Idaho has taken, an abortion clinic that is set up right on the border. Guess what? That's going to be pushed hundreds of miles away. So there's a lot of good things in this that are going to happen if this is something that continues. And I'll just say, as I mentioned, that yes, the other states are watching this. Other states are looking and trying to do the same thing. Been contacted by people all over the United States. A lot of pro-family movements are watching this, and they're very supportive. Because it's one thing that makes sense. It's something that we can do when you feel like your government no longer is listening to you as they should. Ultimately, I know it's an uphill battle, but all we're asking today is that the conversation begin. That's all we're asking. You're not committed to anything except let's begin that conversation. And let me, at this time, as we move forward, turn the rest of the time, well, the next part of the time over to Representative Judy Boyle. Oh, no. I'll just introduce him, okay. Then actually what I will do is we are privileged to have the former Speaker of the House of Oregon, the Republican Party House of Oregon with us, who has helped to head up this movement, and that would be Mr. Mark Simons. And so if we'd like to turn that time over to him right now, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Simons, please come to the podium and introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you. I am Mark Simmons, former Speaker of the House, Oregon State Legislature. It's been 23 years ago when we did have a Republican majority. I live outside of the little town of Elgin, which is just north of La Grande. We are a ranch family. The whole family's involved, and it's kind of a little settlement. All the neighbors in the two directions that you can go on our road, you know, our family, nieces and nephews, and so on and so forth. And we have a tight-knit community. We want to see the kind of law that reflects faith, family, moral virtue, self-reliance, hard work, the things that Idaho is based on applied in our side of Oregon. The law has changed, and there's been a gradual erosion in our communities. We now have, the sheriff at home is a friend of mine, and they have challenges with people cruising in the wee hours of the morning looking for something to steal so they can feed their drug habit. Clear out in little Union County in Northeast Oregon. All the laws that are handed down have a compounding effect. And if there's not some kind of standard set through the law to encourage people to behave appropriately, my opinion, it erodes. It's a slippery slope. And we have a huge cultural divide. The laws are handed down from the city of Portland. There's ballot measures, as you may be aware. We had one on gun control that's completely unconstitutional. They've been gathering signatures on one that would make it impossible to manage your ranch animals. No branding, no cutting, no injections, and you could only eat the ones that died naturally. You know, that's not going to make a very good steak, quite frankly. But we are constantly battling that, and we see this as a solution. You know, consider us refugees, consider us, we would like to be good neighbors to the folks on the west side. While they continue with their social engineering experiments, go ahead, just leave us out. There's a clear legal path, as Representative Ehart referred to. And it has been done before. It's not been done on this scale for some time. For an example, I think in 2020, the West Virginia Senate renewed an invitation for counties, whole counties, a whole county in Virginia to join them, move the border around and move that county's legal residency to West Virginia. So there is a clear legal path. You know, and I know there are naysayers, but I do think, and I hope you will agree, I mean, I'm so grateful to be here today and be able to stand before you and advocate for this. I really am. Very grateful. And there's a lot of discussions to have. And, you know, when we parted from the British many, many, many years ago, there were many who said it could never happen. It would never happen. But if you study history, it happened. As we all know, we are not subjects of the crown. And I hope you will give this your favorable support today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. It does look like we have a question for you. So I know we're kind of in the middle of this initial presentation, but do you mind taking a question?
I'm at your
real quickly?
disposal.
Representative Crane.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Mr. Speaker. Could you outline for me what the process looks like? I understand the need, I understand the desire, but what's the process practically? How does this work?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Once two states negotiate an interstate compact, it can then go to Congress and Congress for their approval. Congress has routinely rubber-stamped interstate compacts. As recently as the late 90s, an interstate compact was formed between two states along the Mississippi River. The river channel had moved, and they adjusted the border. In 1957 and 58, Oregon and Washington formed an interstate compact to clarify the border along the Columbia River between the two states, and it was then approved by Congress. This is a larger scale project, obviously, but there is that clear legal path. I hope I've answered your question.
Representative Crane.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Speaker. Who will set the compact? Is the governor? Is it the legislatures?
Legislatures.
I mean, get me down in the 500-foot view.
Okay.
How's this going to work in the forming of this interstate compact? And then is it House and Senate and President that have to sign off on it, or is it just the House? So walk me through at fine detail exactly how it's going to work.
Mr. Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Constitution prescribes that the legislatures of the two states come together. Who would negotiate is not prescribed in the Constitution. So I would think that whoever you appoint, the legislators in Idaho appoint, would be the ones to sit down with legislators from Oregon and negotiate this. And what we have been doing to support that, the initiation of such a process, is to have votes county by county in a lot of eastern Oregon. But the rest, I think, is yet to be defined as far as the granular level. Obviously have to be a vote in each chamber, in each state, for the legislature to have approved it.
And then final question. Yeah, so how does it work then at the federal level? Is it just Congress, Senate, President?
the way the Constitution reads, it's just Congress.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Are there any further questions? Representative Skog.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Speaker, thank you for being here today. I'm following up a little bit on Representative Crane's questions. I like this idea. I'm glad you're here. I want us to listen and get into these talks. But do you ever see a liberal Democrat legislature out of Salem letting your counties go?
Mr.
Thank you.
Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Skog. We've done polling, we've done economic analysis in Oregon as well as in Idaho. And in Idaho here it was Points Consulting out of Moscow we hired to do an in-depth analysis. And we've done analysis in Oregon as well. And Oregon is a income tax driven budget. The majority of the best paying jobs are in the Willamette Valley. And so the way it would work is the way it does work is each taxpayer over there contributes about $500 a year to Eastern Oregon to maintain the roads and other services. And when we have polled the people of Western Oregon, it's not worth it to them. You know, to have a place for their wind farms, solar projects, and a place to hike on some trails. It's not worth it to them. And if the elected leaders will follow the will of the people, then this will happen. We are exploring, there is a bill in the Oregon Senate right now, similar memorial, that we are working. I don't know, it's early in the session for Oregon yet. But we will do everything we can to encourage them to allow us to go our own way and join with Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Speaker Simmons, does the governor have any role in approving or disapproving the legislature's actions?
As I read the Constitution, no. The governor does not have to approve, just the legislatures.
Follow up.
One follow. Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair and Speaker Simpson. You mentioned that Eastern Oregon taxpayers subsidize Western Oregon in the amount of about $500 each. Is that?
Western Oregon's subsidized.
Western Oregon subsidizes Eastern Oregon. Okay. And if the counties were to join Idaho, would Idaho taxpayers need to provide similar subsidies to the counties, or how would that work?
Thank
Mr.
you,
Simmons.
Representative Gannon, Madam Chair. Your tax system is different. You're a sales tax state, and so that would change, and that there would no longer be a subsidy from Portland to Eastern Oregon. But because of the change in the tax structure, we would not need a subsidy. Actually, the Points Consulting document that has just recently come out indicates that Eastern Oregon would provide a net benefit of somewhere around $170 million a year to the Idaho revenues.
Thank you. Representative Crane 12.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for being here. Quick question for you. Do you know what percentage of the land that would be acquired by Idaho would be federal or BLM land as opposed to state land?
Mr. Simmons.
Madam Chair, Representative Crane, I don't. I know that a big chunk of Southeast Oregon is BLM, but what percentage of that? Oregon is over 50% public lands. Okay. When you include it all. And so, okay. But I'd be happy to get you that information.
Wonderful.
Crane.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Chair, sorry, Mr. Speaker, question for you. I know that I believe 11 counties have voted in favor of this. Is that right?
Mr.
Is that
Simmons.
the last count? Okay. Yeah.
And my question then is, what majorities of those counties pass this? Is it a slim majority? Is it overwhelming support? I'm concerned about the will of the people.
Mr. Simmons.
Thank you, Representative Alfieri, Madam Chair. One of the first ones that passed was my home county of Union County, and we were behind the curve. We were dealing with COVID. We didn't even get an explanatory statement in the ballot measure statement that's mailed out to everyone to inform them of what they're voting on, and it passed narrowly. It did. Other counties, I'm confident, and we didn't have anything to promote it with either. We couldn't run a campaign. We didn't have much money. When we have been able to get a statement in the voters pamphlet and maybe a few signs out, we've been passing it by almost 70%. And the 65 is a bit of an average there.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. All right, we need to finish our introductory presentation here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Representative Boyle, were you planning to close up?
One.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, I'm Judy Boyle, Representative District 9. I just wanted to partially answer that question about federal land. I know Harney County, that's where Burns is, 75% of that county is federal land.
All right. Representative Boyle, will you yield to a question from Representative Barbieri?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Boyle, so that was what I was curious about. Do you think that the federal lands aspect of within those counties is going to benefit the state, or do you think it's going to be difficult for the state to assimilate that? Tell us a little bit about how you expect the federal lands to be dealt with. As we already know, Idaho's got the same issue. So talk a little bit about that. Give us some idea what you're thinking there.
Representative Boyle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative, as you know, Idaho has a lot of the same problem. For example, Custer County, 97% federal land. So we're pretty used to dealing with the feds. And as you also know, we have a federalism committee that right now we finished a pilot program to study about the PILT program. The federal government was supposed to make all those counties whole regarding property tax. It was supposed to be the same. Instead, we've gotten pennies on the dollar. So that is one thing we can move forward. We'll just add those counties with us.
Follow up?
Yes, please. Thank you, Representative Boyle. The minerals and natural resources of which we speak over there, are those pretty much all locked up and within the federal lands, or is, what's the balance there in terms of what is within the federal lands and restricted and those that would be accessible to the state?
Representative Boyle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative, there's quite a few scattered throughout that over there. There are quite a few private ranches. One ranch in particular I know that the federal government has been after because they have strategic minerals that they want to lock up, and these ranchers refuse to sell to them.
One more, if I may.
Follow up?
Yes,
Representative
just a
Barbieri.
separate question. So I'm wondering, and I don't know whether the history has been in the other examples or not, but would there be some potential of the state paying Oregon to take that land or some kind of compensation?
Representative Boyle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative, that is definitely not my intent. I don't think any Idahoan wants to pay Oregon for anything, because who knows what kind of a bill. But that is what this resolution, this memorial would do, is let us talk about these kind of things. You know, that's all we are asking with this, is just to let us talk with Oregon.
Thank you, Representative Boyle. All right, so that concludes our introductory presentation. We now have a number of individuals who have signed up to give personal testimony on this issue. So we'll have 3 minutes for each of the testifiers. And, oh, is it 2? Okay. We've got it set for 2 minutes. We'll do 2 minutes for each of these personal testimonies, beginning with Michael Oswald. Mr. Oswald, please come to the podium and introduce yourself and who you represent for the record.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. I am here in my individual capacity I am a business lawyer living in Boise. I am blessed to have moved here from California almost 12 years ago. And a large part of my law practice is in residential real estate here in the Treasure Valley. So I believe that expanding Idaho by the Eastern Oregon would create many more housing opportunities for people who, like me, still want to come here from other places. And I think it would also have the beneficial effect of placing less demand on farmers to sell their property for real estate development.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Are there questions for Mr. Oswald? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Next up, we have Jason Green. Mr. Green, please state your name and who you represent for the record.
I'm Jason Green, just individual from Soda Springs, and I'm in favor of HJM1. Idaho would increase its autonomy and self-sufficiency as a sovereign state. Plans in the Greater Idaho Initiative would give the state a Pacific Ocean seaport. The importance of a seaport cannot be underestimated, considering that central government policies disrupt and even stop the free movement of goods, especially as we saw during the height of COVID hysteria. The people of Eastern Oregon are culturally and politically aligned with Idaho. A representative in Southeast Idaho, where I'm from, pointed out that we already cooperate with Eastern Oregon on a number of agricultural and economic practices. These are the reasons that I am in favor of HJM1.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. Green? All right, seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. Next up will be Tyler McCune. Mr. McCune, are you here? I have him down as an in-person. All right, so we will proceed to Matthew Jensen. You know the drill.
Good morning. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my fellow Idahoans, my name is Matthew K. Jensen, resident of District 17 and lifelong Idahoan. The original version of this was quite a bit longer, but what we have before us is boiled down to some rather simple parts. And I may have given off a rather incorrect impression when I said rather publicly that my view on Greater Idaho is nuanced. Thing is, while we in Idaho generally don't actually owe these Eastern Oregon counties anything, they are still in a rather untenable situation. Not only are they collectively being ignored, but the people of those counties are in a situation in which some rather progressive and authoritarian legislators in Salem are expressing enjoyment in repressing the different viewpoints of Eastern Oregon. They are unfortunately at that point, which is much like when petitioning the king failed and a more perfect union was necessary. We are now at that point where we can't ignore the plight of those people. Moving the border won't be fun, and will be a lot more involved than changing the line on a map. But Idaho should at least keep going to see where this goes. Indeed, if you would have asked me a couple of years ago if Greater Idaho would even be getting to this point, I would have told you that you're insane, and I would have meant it. But here we are. There are reservations. I indeed myself would insist on zero changes to the compendium of Idaho laws and expectations. But if the people in these counties already are well aware of that, then that means we should do it anyways. Let's do it. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Are there any questions for Mr. Jensen? All right, seeing none, thank you. Last on the list, we have John Lawson. Mr. Lawson, please state your name and who you represent for the
Good morning,
record.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Lawson, good name for a retired attorney and a retired Eastern Oregon law enforcement officer. I do answer to the name Johnny Law. I'm raised in Klamath Falls, Oregon, so I am an Oregonian by birth, and also I'm a Vandal, though. I did go to the U of I, graduated in '67 with a degree in forestry, and then went to serve in Vietnam and came back and opened up a law practice in Los Angeles, and later moved to the rural area of Modoc County up against the Oregon border, closer to my hometown. And when I moved my practice there, this is after 10 years as a police officer with LAPD, I was interviewed by a reporter who asked me, what is your career objective in Modoc County? And I says, I'd like to be the first governor of the state of Jefferson. Now, if you're not familiar with that, back in October of 1941, Northern California counties and southeastern Oregon counties wanted to secede from their respective states and become the state of Jefferson. The state flag was going to have two big X's on it because they felt like they were being double-crossed by their respective governments. Anyway, that's my passion is creating Greater Idaho. But I want to bring you back to the current time.
Mr. Lawson, just so you know, you have about 30 seconds.
Yes, okay. People identify with places they love. Well, I love Eastern Oregon and I love Idaho. And I had a hard time choosing which side to move into. Well, I've been in Boise for 12 years now and I love it, but I want Eastern Oregon to be part of my state. And I say that passionately, and I ask you to open your arms and welcome in the people of that state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Are there questions? Thank you for your testimony today. All right, committee, there may be some members here in the audience that would also like to testify, and we have the time. So if you would raise your hand if you are hoping to give some personal testimony, I'll give you 2 minutes to speak. Gentleman right here in the front.
Good morning. My name is William Howell, Kurt Howell. That's what I go by. And I am with the Greater Idaho Movement. Get my eyes on. I own an independent seed business as well as a farmland in Union County, Oregon. Oregon has the most liberal and dangerous drug laws in the nation. Government releases convicted sex offenders and murderers back into unsuspecting communities without any conditions or supervision. Public education statistics in Oregon are more like those from a third world nation. Oregon has oppressive taxes such as the Unfair Corporate Activity Tax, or CAT. This tax is levied on businesses such as a sales tax without regard for profitability. Another new revenue scheme is a law taking money from businesses and employees for paid leave. An example of a flawed law with gray area providing attorneys opportunity to engage in legal action. We now have an overtime law that is quite punitive to agriculture or other industries that are time or seasonal sensitive. State bureaucrats dictated unlawful rules or mandates during the C-19 disaster. This Department of Environmental Quality has ruled that no new vehicles with petroleum fuel engines will be sold after 2035. A good coal-fired plant was torn down over at Boardman. Imagine the difficulty today in trying to get the permits to build hydro, nuclear, or other means of electrical power. I believe Oregon has left me, my family, neighbors, and fellow Oregonians without a voice in our government. The state government has become oppressive and dictatorial. But without interference from Salem, we will become strong contributing citizens of the great state of Idaho. And I thank you very much for your time and consideration of our proposals.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none. Are there any other individuals in the audience who were hoping to testify? Sir, please come forward and state your name and who you represent.
So my name's Matt McCaw, and I'm the spokesperson for Greater Idaho. So I've been involved with the movement for about 2 years. And so I get to talk to lots of people about all the reasons why this makes sense for Eastern Oregonians, Western Oregonians, and Idahoans. But I have limited time today. So what I want to focus on, and I think one of the representatives brought it up, was that this is a solution that has broad support. It has wide support amongst the people. So rarely do we find solutions to problems that are mutually beneficial and that most people agree upon. But Greater Idaho is one of those solutions. So we've had 11 counties in Eastern Oregon that have already passed measures saying they want their elected leaders to look into this. There's also been polling done, both in Western Oregon and in Idaho. So they asked people in Western Oregon, do you want the state to look into moving the border? Do you think we should look into this as a solution, long-term solution to the urban-rural divide and problems that we have in Oregon? And when they did that, 68% of respondents in Western Oregon said, yes, we should have this conversation. So that was Western Oregon. They did similar polling in Idaho. And in Idaho, there was a strong majority of people that said, yes, we would be okay with moving the border to include these Eastern Oregon counties. And when the polling asked specifically if they would want to add counties that were similar to Idaho and could provide an economic benefit, the supporters outnumbered the detractors by over 2 to 1, which is all just to say that the people in Oregon and Idaho understand the issue here, and they're ready to have this conversation. So I would ask that you guys consider starting this conversation, moving this bill forward, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, seeing none.
Madam Chairman.
Sorry, Representative Andrus.
Sorry, I turned it on a little late. Yes, Madam Chair, I'm looking at your website, and what's the latest map that we're going on? I see there's a different one on the website than I have seen in the latest printed material. Where are we that way?
Yeah.
Sir.
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, so our initial proposal when we started this movement, there's a huge urban-rural divide in almost everywhere. It's not just Oregon. It's in California. It's in Washington. It's in Oregon. So when we first started, we looked at the map and said, where would it make sense to group similarly minded people? People that vote the same way, make their livings the same way, have similar values. And so that original map included part of Southeast Washington and included part of Northern California. As we've moved forward, we've been going county by county and asking voters directly, do you want your elected leaders to look into this? As we've moved forward, we've narrowed that map down to those places where people are overwhelmingly voting, yes, we do want this to move forward. So we have redrawn that map, and our proposal now is just the eastern part of Oregon. It's about 63% of the land mass, about 9% of the population, and that's what we're moving forward with right now.
All right. Any other questions, committee? All right.
Yes. Oh, I have a question.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And sir, how many square miles is it that you're proposing to add? Do you know roughly?
I do not know that number. I know that what we're talking about is 63% of the state of Oregon, and I think it would increase the size of Idaho by 70-ish%. It's a big chunk of land. It's not a lot of people. It's 9% of Oregon's population, about 400,000 people. But it is a big chunk of land. And I was just, somebody had asked earlier also about what percentage of that land is privately owned, state-owned, federally owned. And we were just finding that information. And so the land we're looking at is about 25% BLM, 25% USFS, and then majority privately owned on top of that. The state of Oregon actually owns very little land in Eastern Oregon, which is part of the reason why this proposal makes sense. The people of Eastern Oregon are very similar to the people of Idaho, culturally, economically, socially, values-wise, politically. And so it makes far more sense, as Representative Ehart has mentioned several times, it makes far more sense for the people in Eastern Oregon to get their state level government from Idaho that matches their values. And that's what we're asking you all to do.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And sir, I'm just trying to get an idea of how much it's going to cost for road maintenance in an area this large with a very small population. And so if Idaho is going to increase its size by 70%, and there are roughly, 9% of Oregon's population is what, 500,000, 400,000, something like
Yeah,
that?
about 400,000, yes.
400,000 people in this huge 63% area of Oregon. I'm just wondering if the tax base really supports the roads, or whether road money is going to have to come from another source, like say the Treasure Valley, in order to maintain and upkeep a road network over this very large area.
Sir?
Yeah, so I think Speaker Simmons mentioned the economic analysis that was done. So I've got a copy of that right here. And this was done by Points Consulting out of Moscow. And they looked at all those sorts of things. And what they discovered was that bringing Eastern Oregon into Idaho would not cause an economic drain on Idaho. And there's several different ways that could be addressed. Part of the beauty of this proposal is that when you're having when the state of Oregon and the state of Idaho are having this conversation, they can hammer out all those sorts of things. Currently, and I believe there's a study, Oregon taxes a certain amount of gas. It has a gas tax and it pays for roads. And currently, because there's so much gas usage in Eastern Oregon on these big stretches of roads, we send money back to the state out of those gas taxes, more than needed to maintain the roads. Now, when Idaho were to take over governance, you guys would have the opportunity to set that however you want. You would have control over what do we want the gas tax to be, for bringing these in, that will make sure that not only do we maintain these roads so that it doesn't become a drain on the state of Idaho, but could even potentially be, an influx of tax revenue to the state.
Representative Gannon.
Madam Chair and Sir, the whatever gas tax Idaho sets is going to have to be uniform. All of us are going to have to pay that. And so, right, I mean, there wouldn't be one gas tax for these 11 counties and another gas tax for the rest of the state. Isn't that?
Sir.
Can you do that?
I believe that anything is open to negotiation between the two states, and I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not sure what that might look like, but that's what we're trying to do, is have this conversation. If we were to we have 400,000 people in Eastern Oregon that feel that their state government does not represent them and is opposed to their way of life and their values. And they see Idaho and they say, these are people that share our values and share our culture, and we want to be part of this. We want to join alongside the people of Idaho, make Idaho stronger, and have government that matches all of our values. So in that negotiation process, I think it would be up to the two state legislatures to decide how do we want to make this transition so that it doesn't become a drain on the state of Idaho? Because the last thing we want to do is, be a burden on anybody. We want to come alongside. We want to join. We want to make everybody stronger.
All right, Representative Allgood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To date, has either state contributed any state money into the research of this plan?
Sir.
No. So far, this has all been grassroots led. This is an organization we started a little over 2 years ago because, again, there's been a long-standing urban-rural divide in Oregon, and the people in Eastern Oregon have felt like they haven't been heard, they haven't been represented. And so a group of people got together and said, what if we move the border? Borders can be moved. Borders have been moved. There's legal precedents and there's a process. What if we move the border and we got governance that we actually wanted and that shares our values? So this has been all grassroots. We have been going around, county by county and asking voters, and we're just starting to get the state legislatures involved. And so no money has been allocated yet for anything like that. But the Claremont Institute did do this economic analysis of our, looking at our proposal so that we could have some hard numbers to look at.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In this process, have you guys reached a point where at some point we would be having that discussion of using state money to build a plan? I mean, has that been discussed, and do you have an idea of what that plan looks like?
Sir.
I do not. the interstate compact process. So it was asked of Speaker Simmons what the process is. So the process is the two state legislatures get together and they figure out, they hammer out all these details. What that would look like, we're not exactly sure. It has happened before, but there's going to be hearings, there's going to be study commissions, I would imagine, where because there's going to be questions that people want answered and we're going to want to have those answers. So there probably will be some money I would imagine spent to look into this. But again, everything's kind of open for negotiation at this point.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for your testimony. Oh, we do have one more question. Representative Skog.
Madam Chair, as I understand it, a motion is always in order. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'll make the motion to send HJM 1 to the floor with a do-pass recommendation.
Thank you, Representative Skog. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think we'll allow the bill sponsors to close if they would like. Is there one more still that would like to testify? All right. Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good committee. We appreciate this. And the questions were fantastic questions. I think probably the biggest takeaway is with some of these questions, you're wanting answers that we're coming to you with this process to get those answers. That's what this process is really about. And so it is through this process that we will determine many of the questions you've asked. I wanted to mention something. Some of the polling that he mentioned, when the polling was first about to be done in Idaho, I was actually telling them, wait, we're doing that polling too soon. People don't even know about what we're talking. And it was interesting because we did the polling anyway, and I was amazed at the results of the polling in Idaho because I felt like they didn't even know everything that we were talking about, and it came back so strongly that I'm like, all right, imagine what's going to happen now when they learn all the positives to this. So I thought that was something, at least from my perspective, that was important to point out. One thing, since Representative Allgood had asked this, I will say when it comes to something the government did do in 2021, Senator Steve Vick and I did host a joint House-Senate committee, and we'll call it a hearing, where we invited Greater Idaho to come and present to us. So that's as far as anything official. That is what had officially been done to that point. And so they came up and presented to us. Many questions were asked at that point, and I believe that was probably one of the main things that helped to lend this some legitimacy as we move forward, as we did hear them. And finally, as just looking at some of the things again being asked, friends, this is a conversation that should at least take place. I think that many of you have been involved in some of these conversations since that time. That's all we're asking, and I would hope that this committee would give it the green light.
Representative Boyle, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Madam Chairman, I don't want to stand in the way of a good motion.
Thank you, Representative Boyle. All right. So, committee, that concludes our public testimony portion of this meeting. And House Joint Memorial 1 is now properly before the committee. We do have a motion that we send House Joint Memorial number 1 to the floor with a do-pass recommendation. Is there discussion on the motion? Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question just on expense. I just wanted to confirm that this memorial doesn't spend any money. And I was wondering if there was going to be a request for funds to support the discussions, and if there was, how that would proceed. I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, Representative Gannon, I think we have the fiscal note before us on the SOP, so maybe I would refer you to that. Representative Barbieri.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment. I think that the benefits to the Idaho citizens is apparent to me anyway, and I'd be interested to see what a legislative delegation could come up with. So I'm going to support the motion. Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of sending House Joint Memorial number 1 to the floor with a do-pass recommendation, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Representative Gannon, would you like to be recorded? All right. Thank you. Thank you for your good work today. And the committee will be adjourned.
John, it says it.